Hello, favorite cousin, and welcome to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. Today we're going to talk about Coix seed, known in Chinese as yiren or yirenmi. General Ma Yuan was part of China's expansive period in the East Han Dynasty, around 40 AD. He conquered the so-called southern barbarians into what is today northern Vietnam. Now, history has taught us that you never invade Russia in winter if you don't want to freeze, Afghanistan if you want to hold it for any period of time, and Vietnam ever. Just leave Vietnam alone. It isn't an easy place to conquer, and it wasn't easy for him. And he had to go up against the Chong sisters, Chong Chak and Chong Ni, who were both highly educated in literature and martial arts and not about to take subjugation from an expansive empire. They successfully organized hill tribes into a unified front and for a while established an autonomous state. But in the end, it was actually Ma Yuan's force of 20,000 men who subdued them. As an aside, these Chung sisters have a story that is nothing short of epic, and it really deserves to be an epic movie. But for the time being, our protagonist is still Ma Yuan. And I may have crossed his footsteps. While in Sichuan, I incidentally encountered a stronghold from southern tribes of this era. I was with some friends who were in Renshou, Sichuan, and they were driving to a famous chicken restaurant. The chickens in this restaurant went into the hills to forage for meat, and because of the unique climate, the chicken had a unique flavor. They had a great way of cooking it, and it's not uncommon for people in Sichuan and China to travel for really amazing food. So while we were waiting, we started to go for a walk, and we saw some farmers playing a card game in a cave. And I got really excited and I went to take a closer look because I saw some carvings in the wall. And this was an ancient so-called southern barbarian Nanman fort. In the sides of the cave, there were holes for bamboo poles, where the bamboo poles were inserted for the floor, as well as at the entrance of the cave to serve as a gate. Beds were carved into rock, and a river must have passed by, as there were water collecting basins carved into the rock so that they could get water without having to go outside. I imagine them walking on a floor made of bamboo and bamboo poles, resisting incoming arrows. The river has since drifted 1,000 feet away, but this stronghold was where a nameless and forgotten tribe made their last stand. And perhaps this is where they were wiped out by Ma Yuan's forces. He would have passed this area on his way up into the Tibetan plateau in Sichuan, where he subjugated the Qiang people, a name that's familiar if you know the herb Qianghuo. That Qiang is the name of this ethnic minority who is still alive and well because they gave up. While he was well respected, both from within the empire and without, in fact, in northern Vietnam, he's worshipped as a god, along with the Chong sisters. He was a renowned warrior, whether or not you're on the side of his imperial leanings. And yet, he found an enemy that he could not subdue while fighting the Wulin tribes. An evil came upon his men as they pushed southwest. It traveled along mist and fog like a dark curse. His men began to feel numbness in their hands and feet. Their legs began to swell, spreading through their body. They were sick and fatigued. Ma Yuan was facing defeat at the hand of microbes. To make matters worse, disease was a pretty big sign that a ruler didn't have the mandate of heaven. Disease wasn't just a setback. It could threaten not only his right to rule his men, but the credibility of Emperor Guangwu. Disease, drought, and famine were the seeds of destruction for every ruler in Chinese history. From the earliest river civilizations until the present, with the Chinese response to COVID-19, it is absolutely essential that whomever is ruling China is seen to have the mandate of heaven. General Ma Yuan had no choice but to set up camp and seek help by the army medical officer. Unfortunately, this medic was more trained in acute battlefield medicine, so he was at a loss when it came to this disease. He wasn't an epidemiologist. He didn't deal with these kind of contagious diseases. So General Ma Yuan posted a notice. He pooled a reward of 500 taels of silver, and the notice was posted on the gate of the camp. And the reward was for anybody who could cure this illness. He waited, but no one came forward. News of their illness was likely to bring on the courage of their enemies, but they needed to take the risk if they were to find any hope of a cure. The heat was thick in the damp, still air. The second day stretched slower than the first, and no one came forward. Now, while the reward was sufficient, it was possible that people feared the cost of failure. Maybe they liked to keep their heads. On the third day, the balmy heat was unbearable, making it impossible to think, when a beggar came into camp carrying only his walking stick that he used to repel rabid dogs. Ma Yuan asked him what his plan was. The beggar smiled, took out a handful of herbs, which looked like pearls or beads from a begging jar. The beggar said, "These are called Coix seeds. They are planted in the fields here and we eat them as a grain. It prevents us from getting the sickness. Cook them in soup and drink the broth." Now, Ma Yuan was pretty sure this guy was full of shit, so he did what any modern military leader would do. He tested it on his soldiers. Unexpectedly, the recipe was extremely effective for curing the men. Their swelling began to subside. Skin rashes started to clear and their breathing felt free. Their numbness subsided and the limbs regained strength as the water retention made its way into the latrines. Ma Yuan was extremely happy and was about to give out 500 taels of silver to thank the beggar, but they couldn't find where he went. So this, dear favorite cousin, is where the accusations of Ma Yuan's character start to come. So yes, he is worshipped in Vietnam and parts of China due to his fighting prowess and respect even from his enemies. However, Ma Yuan may have been light in his fingers when it came to military finance. Sort of like the way the US lost $1 trillion per year in the Middle East in the last 20 years. Losing $1 trillion in a war zone is apparently an ancient tradition. According to the history books, Ma Yuan was successful and brought back several carts of Coix seeds to be planted in the north. An observer claimed that he was carting off rare pearls and accused him of embezzling. Was he bringing Coix seeds alone? Were there pearls in the mix? He was thought to be guilty at the time, but was exonerated after his death by the Empress, who also happened to be his daughter. So did he do it? I believe that he was a brave and well-respected general. I also find it suspicious that he raised money for the beggar's reward, but the beggar was not found to collect the silver. Where did that silver go? If in the modern world war is a great place to lose trillions of dollars, I suspect ancient battlefields were similarly good places to lose money. In any case, today Coix seeds are a crucial part of Chinese medicine and a staple you can find in any grocery store or farmer's market in China today. They're used in 8 treasure porridge, which is common breakfast that you can find on any street corner in the morning. As people go off to their offices, they'll pick up some 8 treasure porridge and some dumplings. I used to do this every day in China. Coix seeds are a part of life. Now, they're often mistranslated as pearl barley or Job's tears, but in fact they're a slightly different species, which is gluten-free. So over time, Coix seeds were brought into the mainstream systems of Chinese medicine, from folk medicine into mainstream medicine. In Shen Nong's Pharmacopoeia, it states that their nature is sweet, light, and cool, and restores the function of the spleen and stomach. It's used to induce urination to reduce swelling, drain dampness, invigorate the spleen to control diarrhea, good for treating arthralgia, clearing inflammation, and draining pus. Most often used for edema, diarrhea due to spleen deficiency, and lung diseases, as well as for arthritis due to dampness. So when we look at the pharmacology, we can get a reference. Does it reduce edema? It does. It increases urination and reduces edema in both human and animal studies. Does it help with diarrhea? It's been shown to help regulate gut microbiota. Does it help with arthralgia? While it doesn't seem to have any direct pain-killing effects, it can reduce pain indirectly by way of the microbiome and the immune system. What about pulmonary disease? Well, it's been shown to positively affect pneumonia and has promising effects on the immune and lung function. It has protective effects of the intestines and helps them heal. It appears to also help with weight loss, and it's reported to help with skin diseases. It is antifungal, antibacterial, and antiviral. Coix seeds are something I believe everybody should have access to, whether it's in a product to help you reduce dampness, whether it's in a tea, whether it's in your food, or all of the above. It is an indispensable herb and grain to help us live our best lives. If you're a practitioner and you would like more information, as well as to explore some of our products, check out botanicalbiohacking.com and sign up for a practitioner account. Thank you so much for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Miles.